Hi everybody, my name is Kim, and welcome back to Bookmarks and Breadsticks. Welcome back to Bookmarks and Breadsticks in my new filming setup for now. I'm pretty sure that this camera is slanted, or at least it'll look like my bookshelves are, but we're just gonna deal with it. I'm filming before work. So if it's 9:22 here, it's 8:22 in Chicago, which means I've got about 30 minutes to get through all of this, which should be fine. But I'm finding more and more that my mornings are becoming a better time for me to film than my evenings. Today, I am here to bring you my May book haul. So if you're new to my channel, you might not know this, but I took a little bit of a break in the month of May from filming new content. I had batched up a lot of content. I moved across the country, well, halfway across the country. I moved from Chicago to New York with my husband and my 2 cats. So the month of May has been very stressful. So I really didn't put too much pressure on myself, except I had made a whole May TBR. And I can tell you I read 1-2 books off of my May TBR. It's okay, life happens. But let me go ahead and tell you what I read. First book I read, I actually listened to as an audiobook, and I will put the picture right here. And that is Why Fish Don't Exist, a story of loss, love, and a hidden order of life by Lulu Miller. I listened to this as an audiobook with Dan when we were driving across the country. So from Chicago to Buffalo took about 8.5 hours, if you add in our pit stops. This audiobook came in about 5 hours, and I thought, perfect, let's have something that we can listen to start to finish, because oftentimes Dan and I could listen to books together, but because they're 12 hours long, I end up finishing them on my own, and Dan never really gets to know what happens. So, Why Fish Don't Exist. I know Olive over at Book. Olive adores this book. I've seen the Book Bully talk about reading this book. It's on her TBR. This was published in April 14th of 2020. It comes in at 256 pages and was a best book of 2020 for the Washington Post, NPR, Chicago Tribune, and the Smithsonian. Now, I have to tell you, I found this book rather confusing. So first, I should just make a full disclosure. You know taxidermy, when they stuff animals with other materials on the inside, but taxidermy, picture of an animal here. So when I read the back of this book and it talked about taxonomy of fish, I thought it talked about the taxidermy of fish. And then my brain immediately took it to the Billy fish on the wall that sang and danced when you pushed that annoying button. You know what I'm talking about. So first off, I went in with the complete wrong expectations of this book. But I also found that this book was kind of set up as a memoir and a writer's obsession with David Starr Jordan. So let me first read the description to you. David Starr Jordan was a taxonomist, not taxidermy. A taxonomist, a man possessed with bringing order to the natural world. In time, he would be credited with discovering nearly a fifth of the known fish In time, he would be credited with discovering nearly a fifth of the fish known to humans in this day. But the more of the hidden blueprint of life he uncovered, the harder the universe seemed to try to thwart him. His specimen collections were demolished by lightning, by fire, and eventually by the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, which sent more than 1,000 discoveries housed in fragile glass jars plummeting to the floor. In an instant, his life's work was shattered. Many might have given up, given into despair, but Jordan, he surveyed the wreckage at his feet, he found the first fish he recognized, and confidently began to rebuild his collection. And this time, he introduced one clever innovation that he believed would at last protect his world against the chaos of the world. When NPR reporter Lulu Miller first heard this anecdote in passing, she took Jordan for a fool and a cautionary tale in hubris or denial. But as her own life slowly unraveled, she began to wonder about him. Perhaps instead he was a model of how to go on when all seemed lost. What she would unearth about his life would transform from understanding of history, morality, and the world beneath her feet. Part biography, part memoir, part scientific adventure, Why Fish Don't Exist is a wondrous fable about how to perverse in a world where chaos will always prevail. So, true to the book, it very much is part biography, part memoir, and part scientific adventure. And that's actually one of my biggest critiques of the book. When I went in, I was expecting the science journey up front, and a good, I'd say half the book is about that scientific journey. And I felt that Lulu's insertion of her own life felt almost like an afterthought in this book. So I first should say that David Starr Jordan is a very interesting man. I think the world, when he's exploring the world, learning about these fish and how to identify them, I thought it was great. I was loving this book. Dan and I were loving this book. As the book goes on, however, the more we learn about Lulu's life and her clinical depression and things going on, the more it actually I sound cruel, but I found the book very unbalanced. I was much more interested in Jordan than I was in Lulu's life. And at her time, her insertion and her point of view, or her meanwhile elsewhere, this is going on in my life, was actually a distraction. I found it not that relatable. What the review on the back of the book, or the introduction, description, does not say on the back of the book, is that eventually David Starr Jordan gets involved in eugenics. And suddenly the book takes a very dark turn, and we learn about his role in getting legislation passed in eugenics, and some of the horrible things that happened to women at very young ages, and they had their reproduction systems removed because they were considered hysterical or mentally unfit or unfit for society. And to his grave, Jordan really believes in eliminating those who are less than ideals and standards. And like, Hitler is inspired by this work and is inspired by the work the United States does to pass eugenics. So you go from this guy who's just learning about fish and some great tragedies he overcomes, both personally and with the collection being destroyed multiple times, to this like very evil character in our American history about eugenics. And I just feel like the book, for 5 hours, puts way too much into it. There's so much there. I want this to be a Netflix limited series, or maybe an HBO short series, because this is a great description of like character growth or character dynamic or someone's personal journey or changing over time. Jordan starts out as this kid who's not liked by a lot of people. He feels a lot of the otherness. He's more interested in nature. He goes on a retreat and learns about the natural order and becomes obsessed with chronicling and organizing fish. And then the eugenics stuff comes in. It's crazy because you really root for him. And then all of a sudden, like, I can't root for anyone that supports eugenics. It's just, whew. And then Lulu Miller, in her role as the narrator, does interview and meet some of the women who survived and escaped their horrific confinement. They can't have, one of them can't have children, obviously, because her reproductive system was removed. And I wanted more of that. And I wanted more of Jordan in the fish world. And when the two parts of his life came together, it just felt very compact. And I can't think of another phrase other than compact, but I wanted more elaboration. I wanted a whole book about his eugenics part where he's the villain. But what I can say is the book is interesting. I'm still talking about this book. I'm still parsing through how I feel about this book. So it has impact. And this is also why I don't do star ratings, because I have very mixed feelings about this book. I'm glad I read it. I think it's important. But if I rated it a 3, you might not ever pick up the book. But if I sing high praises and gave it 5 stars, what does that say endorsing a book that covers a man who was one of the biggest advocates for eugenics? It just feels a little weird. But that was only book 1. This review is going to take a while, apparently. So that was Why Fish Don't Exist by Lulu Miller that I read in May. Sticking with nonfiction, I also read Entangled Life, How Fungi Make the World, Change Our Minds, and Shape Our Futures by Merlin Sheldrake. So this was the only book I got to for this Springathon, from my Springathon TBR, but I did it. I loved reading this. I did not know a lot about the world of fungi. Probably, I would say none. And it's about 225 pages, and I adored this book. I learned so much from it. It makes me want to study mushrooms more. Now, when I go to the farmer's market and I look at mushrooms, I'm like, you have a whole network and you can do so much more than like humans can. One of the experiments that they talk about in the book is that there's fungi or, oh my gosh, there's so many different scientific terms. Forgive me, I'm just not doing a good doing it justice, but they put this fungi in a petri dish and then they put a resource, which would be a log of wood, let's say across the petri dish. And those fungi, despite having no brain, no central nervous system, know to spread out their little feelers and find that wood and take the nutrients from it. And it does it all on its own without human prompting or anything. So I found these super interesting. I really want to read more about it. I actually have a couple more mushroom books around, like Mushroom Hunters is on my shelf somewhere. I'm looking over here because there are more books. These are what I've read. Over here is what is not wrapped yet, which I will be wrapping, don't worry. And all the wrapped books are in the other room. But anyway, Entangled Life, highly, highly recommend. I believe I got this recommendation from a book, Olive, again. So thank you, Olive, for this recommendation. I'm obsessed. I cannot wait to read more. And I do plan on getting to a lot of those books that were on my Springathon TBR. I want to carry into summer. Next is a memoir, Spiced, a pastry chef's true stories of trial by fire, after-hour exploits, and what really goes on in the kitchen. I saw this, it's by Dahlia Jurgensen, who gets called Doll a lot, or Dolly in the book a lot. It is a memoir, and Anthony Bourdain endorsed it on the cover. Great insider stuff and a valuable addition to the annals of first-person culinary history. Now, I've actually never read a memoir by pastry chefs. I don't think there are as many out there compared to your white heterosexual chef memoir. It's a lot of fun. And Dahlia has a whole other career and then decides to go to culinary school and ends up in pastry first and ends up being like an assistant pastry chef at Nobu. Nobu is a phenomenal restaurant, and it's just her role and how she learns to maneuver a kitchen where it's predominantly men, where men are sexist. What are you going to do? This is dated, obviously. This is much earlier than the Me Too movement. Let me check the year for you guys. 2009. It's 12 years old. So a lot has changed since then. But it's an entertaining memoir, and it reveals her transition from behind the desk to over the stove and what really goes on behind the swinging doors. She divulges the dynamic between cooks and waiters, chefs and food critics, heated affairs between staff, and reveals her stint testing recipes for Martha Stewart. So what I loved about Dahlia's life is that she rotates through all of the stations. She comes into the culinary world thinking she wants to be a chef. So, she does do the appetizer station, the entree station, the grill, the fried food, sauces, and etc. So we get to see her go through all of that and also find her love for pastry. But we also get to see Dahlia leave the food world in the sense of a traditional restaurant and go work at Martha Stewart Living in the compound in Connecticut and become a recipe tester. There's lots of different parts of the culinary world we don't get to see a lot of. And it was really interesting to get some insights on what it's like to be a recipe tester, what it's like to work in that compound. Obviously, again, this is 12 years old. So this is before everyone was making content on YouTube, before everyone had web series, or video series, like I think of the Bon Appetit web series that exist and the Eater series that exist. I loved this. I thought that Dahlia is hilarious. She's got a good attitude throughout it, even in retrospect, some of the bullshit she had to put up with because of sexism. I really, really enjoyed it, and I really recommend that you guys read it. I was very surprised how much I liked it because I just had never read anything about a pastry chef before. And getting to see what it's like as a chef, as a pastry chef, tweak recipes, which are very much scientific and weight-based, that process was really, really interesting. Because in cooking, you can throw a pinch of salt, a pinch of pepper. Pinches don't exist in baking. It's all measured. So anyway, Spiced, really good book. The final nonfiction book, I realize that when I sit back in the chair, I probably look a little sloppy, so forgive me. The last book I read was Crying in H. Bart by Michelle Zauner. If you guys haven't already seen the video, The Ladies of Feasting Female did discuss this book, and not only this book, but this book came from an article in the New Yorker that Michelle wrote. So she wrote the New Yorker article first that then led to this book. So I'll link it in the cards. I really recommend you guys come and take a listen to that. That's our second Feasting Females. We'll probably be back again at least one more time this summer. So first off, I have a signed copy, which makes me super happy. I actually listened to Crying in H Mart. I listened to a lot of books this month, which is fine. I listened to this book because Michelle narrated it herself. And I've always said that if an audiobook is narrated by the author, I think there's a level of intensity and emotion, no matter how subtle, that will get into that book. And I love this. This book could very well be my favorite book of the year so far. Michelle is dealing with grief and the loss of her mom. Her mom died from cancer. Like, this just hit really, really close to home for me. And I think I talked about this in my May book haul. I talked about this book somewhere, but I really, really loved it. I find it very powerful. Highly recommend. And it's her journey about understanding what it means to be Korean American. And she didn't have, at the beginning, a great relationship with her mother. And then it's about her building this relationship, and also the role of her father and her strained relationship with her father, and what happens when it's just Michelle and her dad. What is the world like when you have to learn to live again without a loved one? This hit very close to home. I highly recommend it. You can taste the things that she describes. You can feel the pain she describes. Beautiful book. So those are the nonfiction. So in nonfiction, I physically read 2 books. I listened to 2 books, this one and Why Fish Don't Exist. So that's 4 books, which honestly was more than I thought I was going to read at all in this month, just because the first 16 days of May were insane. Once we got into the house, which now it's June 1st, we've been here 2 weeks, I just felt like a huge weight came off and I could read. So the latter half of this year, this month, goodness gracious, I read fiction. I read 4 fiction books. So first I should say I was reading Accidentally Engaged in the month of April, and I finished it on May 1st. So we're going to put this one aside, but I need to say that this, technically I finished in May. Accidentally Engaged is by Farah Heron, and it is a Indian relationship, fake dating trope / cooking competition web series. So it's like Chopped with a fake dating, but they're not fake dating, but her parents want her to get engaged to this guy, but she ends up liking him, but to be on the cooking competition, they're fake engaged, thus accidentally engaged. So they're engaged, but they're telling their families that they're not engaged because she doesn't believe in arranged marriages. Anyway, it's fun. I love it. So the 3 other books I read this month. Sour Heart by Jenny Zhang. This I read with Margaret Bernard as a buddy read. If you haven't already seen that, I'll link our live show. We just had it this last weekend. And this is about Chinese American girls growing up in Queens, growing up in New York in the 1960s, 1970s. It's very powerful. The discussion with Margaret was great. I think it brought up a lot of things I didn't think about, and how important it is to read books that are challenging and are just different from what you're used to. And it's okay to learn. Because I was very nervous when I was reading this book that I just didn't understand a lot of the cultural references or the traditions or some of the more nuanced meaning behind the book. And Margaret and I had a great conversation about it's okay as long as you continue to read diversely, and why are you trying to read diversely? And I'm trying to read diversely because I want to understand people. I want to see the world more. I mean, obviously we didn't travel anywhere because of COVID. So very challenging book, very detailed, very descriptive, very coarse, very in your face. There is no sugar plum fairy sugarcoating of what it's like to be a Chinese American girl growing up in the 60s to 70s. So I don't know if it was my favorite book. And again, this is why I don't rate and star rate things, because I don't think it was my favorite book, but I'm glad I read it. Next up is The Say Yes Summer by Lindsay Roth Cully. This is young adult. Rachel has worked so hard her entire high school life, becoming valedictorian, and actually sacrificed a lot of normal social norms to get where she is and be successful. Now she has one last summer before she leaves for college, and she decides it's the summer of saying yes. It involves a love triangle with two different boys. One's more of a childhood friend. One's the guy she's always had a crush on. She works at her family's pizzeria and ends up driving around kind of a bicycle minivan, like ice cream truck. So it was very cute. It's, oh my gosh, maybe 220 pages. I probably read it in an afternoon. It was cute. I'm in my 30s now, so I don't relate to this as much, but it reminds me of like the times where I read Sarah Dessen, not as in depth. I think there could have been way more character development here, but they're also in high school. So maybe at the time, if I was in high school reading this would hit differently. But it was super cute. And final book that I finished just last night is I Love You So Mochi by Sarah Kuhn. This, again, I listened to as an audiobook, and this is about Kimiko. Kimiko has gotten into a very prestigious art school to become a painter and has suddenly discovered in the spring of her senior year it's not what she wants in life. It's her mother's passion and not hers. It causes a huge fight, and she actually mysteriously receives a letter from her mother's estranged parents, so her grandparents, for a ticket for spring break to go to Kyoto. So Kimmy gets on a plane and goes to Kyoto to understand her grandparents and starts on the journey of finding herself. And of course, there is a love interest, Akira, who she meets while she's there. This is delightful. I found it very charming. I love the idea of the American going to Japan and like she's Japanese American, but learning about all the food that's there. Like, I loved that because Dan and I were supposed to take our honeymoon to Japan. We want to experience all the food. So I'm living through this high schooler Kimmy a little bit. Kimmy. Sorry, it was probably really silly, but it was very cute. And I also, it's pretty new. I'd say 2019. So there's Skype, there's a lot more references of modern things that I appreciate. I loved her friends. One of them has like a love blog, like a love advice column, which is so hilarious. There's representation with Bex and her new girlfriend. So I loved seeing same-sex representation, especially for high school age students. It was a lot of fun. I'm glad I read it. So in total, I listened to 5 audiobooks and I read 3 physical books. I'm a little not annoyed at myself, but I've noticed I've been listening to books a lot more than reading them. So I am trying to read in the morning now. I am in New York, but I'm working Chicago time, so I always have that extra hour. And I'm trying to read in the morning instead of at night and really get back to physical books because I buy physical books and I want to touch them, and I'm always happy when I'm touching and reading. So that's kind of a goal for this summer. We'll leave it this way. So that is my May wrap up. I'm still proud I even got through this many books given the move and how crazy life has been. Have you read any of these books? Are any of them on your list? Let me know in the comments below. If you've made it this far in the video, drop a chef, the emoji with the little hat, to let me know that you're here and watching and you're loving what I'm doing. And if you haven't already, I would love for you to hit like and subscribe. I post new content every Tuesday and Saturday, and sometimes bonus content on Thursdays. And if you want to support my channel, I have affiliate links to all of these books in the description below, and links to my Patreon and the Read It and Eat subscription box. I hope you are well. Wear a mask if you're not vaccinated. If you are, congratulations. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.